superstars, welcome back to another episode of Word Up with Dani Katz. It is my great pleasure and honor to be joined today by Jason Breshears of Archaix TV and the Archaix YouTube channel. For those who aren't familiar with his work, there's no way I can possibly do it justice. He has over 3 decades of research informing his books, his videos, his PDFs. In very short, truncated, reductive summary, Jason has honed in on the idea that we are living in an AI simulation, which he calls AIX, that resets itself. Well, I guess one cycle is every 138 years. But as Jason explains in our conversation, there are other cycles as well. I found it especially auspicious that Jason and I recorded this conversation on Monday, January, is it 15th? Yes, Monday the 15th, which is allegedly the day that we are moving out of the Kali Yuga, for those who are tracking these larger cycles. So Jason's expertise is obviously in history, in chronology, and in ancient calendrical systems, but he is a wealth of fascinating information. So buckle up and prepare to enjoy my conversation with Jason Breshears of Archaix.
Almost sounds like we're on a date.
Kinda. Okay, so Jason, I couldn't begin to do justice to your massive body of work and all of the worldviews and paradigms that you're smashing, but just to give my audience the briefest of context and overviews so they understand our conversation, as I understand it, you have done mountains of research and come to the conclusion that we're living in an AI simulation that resets itself every 138 years. Is that accurate?
It's an oversimplification because this 138-year period isn't a total reset every time. It is definitely a perceivable and very well documented cycle. But as far as its magnitude, it changes in accordance to wherever the human family is at the time.
Okay, so we're going to walk super slowly through this. I'm very curious about you. Like, as I understand it, you learned all this information while you were in prison. I'm curious to know, before that happened, did you always have a capacity to process and make meaning and find patterns in such large swaths of information, or did that come on later in life for you?
It was developmental, but this development was accelerated because even as a young child, my punishment for any time I got in trouble was to read books. And my mother was puritanical Southern Baptist, and this is what I had to go to the library every week, and one book was basically the book that I wanted to check out for myself, and the other book was a punishment book. So I was in trouble every single week, and I had to read both books before we went back to the library the next week. So public libraries in the mid to late 70s and the 80s were very, very popular. Prior to the internet, public libraries were where a lot of people went, especially my family, because it was, puritanical Southern Baptist. So I was already well read before I went to prison at 17 years old.
Got it. Okay. And then I'm curious I'm certainly no expert on your body of work. It's so massive, though I have been tracking you for, I would say, over a year. I'm curious to know what books you were accessing in prison and how it was that there was this collection of this body of knowledge.
Okay, that's a fair question. Most people have a very rudimentary understanding of the prison culture. First of all, we don't have access to computers. We don't have any computers. In our cells, the only access to information we have are periodicals, newspapers, and books. And books are treasured in prison. And there are men who have done 20, 30, 40, and 50-year sentences, and they've been there the entire time. And some of these men they've been trading these books, and I mean, I've read so many books from the 1800s that were just sitting on prison library shelves because prisons, once they fund a library, they're not going to spend a dime more on prisoners. So whatever old books are in that library are the old books you're stuck with. The old books in Texas are all in the damn prisons. So um, they closed the Eastham prison down, famous for Bonnie and Clyde. When they closed that down, I was on Eastham and I had access because it was one of my jobs to clean out these basement levels and to clean all these boxes out. And I come into contact with these old wooden crates that were packed full of all these old books. And I'd ask, what's all this? Some of them had mold on them and all. I said, what's going on with all these books? And I was just told that, man, I don't know. It's a part of the Texas heritage, I guess, because they're not throwing any of the old furniture away either. It's all here from the days of Bonnie and Clyde. They closed that unit down and built a new Eastham prison in the 1970s right next to it. And that's where I was housed. I was housed in the 1970s Eastham, but the old Eastham from the 1800s and 1920s, where Clyde Barrow was, um, is right there too. And I'm going through the books of that old library. I spent years going through that material, but yeah, it wasn't just the books in the prisons. It's when people started realizing what I was doing, I was writing all these people. I started getting benefactors. I was getting people sending me books from the 17 and 1800s all over the world, and I was amassing all this material. And I even had a publisher looking at me for a while. Then he dropped me, and another publisher picked me up, and he's already published 7 of my books. But 4 of them were published before I ever got out of prison. So this books just came to me all my life. I've always had a surplus of books, and my family's always made sure the whole time I was in prison, the whole 26 years I was in prison, my family was steadily sending me books. Anything, any titles and authors I could come up with, they'd hunt them down and send them to me. So it's a it's a lot to process, but truth be told, I could have been in a monastery and done the exact same thing. It didn't have anything to do with prison. It had everything to do with not being distracted. I didn't go out on dates. I didn't have hobbies. I didn't have a job that I had to go to. I had no children to take care of. I had no spouse, girlfriend, or wife that I had to expend time on. So my escape was intellectualism, and it was just deeply diving into these history books. And after years of doing that, it was inescapable. All the things that I began seeing, they took on new meanings. And I realized that the education that we are given is essentially wrong and that it's entirely planned that way.
I'm curious because I know that you were raised as a Southern Baptist with, traditional worldview. And then somewhere along the way, as you're doing your research, it seems like your worldview was shattered. And I'm wondering, like, what that process was like for you and how resistant you were to that, because it seems like a lot of the critiques around your work don't really have anything to do with your work, but just people's own attachment to their worldview and the fear that comes up around letting that go.
I agree. I agree 100%. I originally set out in my earlier writings, which are available now. I still have many. I have 27 books I've written, but about 11 of them are not published, but they're still available. I make them available on my website as PDF downloads. But my original books were all trying to support the Judeo-Christian paradigm. I was stringently trying to go through all the anthropological material, the archaeological, geological. I wanted to see every single thing that we have ever discovered, documented, translated, every text, every tablet, every archaeological monograph. I went through everything in the known English-speaking world that had been translated into English, and it after about by the time I was 40 years old, I realized that this can't be true, and that almost every story in the Old Testament was actually written over 1,000 years after the events they depict and taken from other sources that were not Jewish. And I found huge fragments and stories in the Zendavesta and the Zoroastrian Holy Scriptures. I found large portions of the Old Testament in the Atrahasis and the Enuma Elish of the Near East. The older Kudo tablets told the entire story of Genesis chapter 14. The whole story of Adam and Eve came straight out of the Babylonian Semitic text concerning the Kainu and the Adamu. And these were descriptions of races and cultures before the flood. They had nothing to do with Adam and Cain. These are pronouns that were invented by Jewish scribes over 1,000 years after the events they depict. So I started looking into the controversial scholars that the rest of academia shunned because it was in them that they were providing answers that the rest of them refused to look at, such as Professor Waddell and Thor Heyerdahl. These men were shunned and by the rest of academia, but when I read their materials, they were telling the absolute truth. This is what I had found as well. This is exactly how the Old Testament was put together. The Babylonians took Judea basically into custody. They deported them, and the Jewish scribes had come into contact with the great, vast Babylonian temple libraries. And they spent years in those libraries stealing their materials and then turn around within 250 years, they had an Old Testament, but none of that history was Jewish. It didn't belong to the Jews. It belonged to Bit Qumri. Bit Qumri is the ancient Amuru name found in tablets all over the ancient world for a people the Bible calls the Israelites. In the Old Testament, they were called the house of Omri, but it translates as Bit Qumri in Assyrian and in the Assyrian cuneiform. And they're found all over. Thousands of Israelite names have been found in the Assyrian once they had been deported. So when the Assyrians weren't there to defend the integrity of their history and their records, when they had been deported, the southern Judahites came in and took their libraries, rewrote all that stuff, to borrow materials from the Babylonian libraries to write the book of Genesis and several other texts. They stole from the Nabateans and took the book of Job, which was never a Jewish text, and they put all this together and then turned around and admitted they did it all in the books of Nehemiah and Ezra. And then because there was so much blowback in the Jewish community about the book of Nehemiah and Ezra and how this Persian politician and Jewish priest got together to claim that they had the word of God when none of those people had ever heard of Moses or anything, they turned around and had to eliminate several writings, but those writings were never totally eliminated. They were removed from the canon, but anybody can read in the Apocrypha, first and second Esdras, where the entire affair is admitted that the Old Testament was invented. So it's this is the subject matter of my research that led me into concluding that there's a lot more to the story to the human family than what I have been programmed to believe.
Did that jostle you on like a fundamental existential level once you realized that everything we had been taught was a lie? Like, how was that on your psychological, emotional state as you were unraveling your own worldview
Yeah,
throughout?
that's a good question too. That's Danny. That's a good question too because our beliefs modify our behavior, and as long as I was sticking to that paradigm, there were many situations in my past that pretty much govern my behavior. I believe that I'm intrinsically a good guy, but I also know that we all have that darkness within us. I was a scrapper in prison, and it got me in a lot of trouble. I actually got more time while I was serving my prison sentence, and that's why I stayed in prison so long. But it's a this worldview that I had maintained had me acting in a certain way in certain situations. Whereas if I wouldn't have held that such a stringent worldview, I may have done things very differently. And what I mean is there are many situations that we're put into in life where telling the truth is exactly the opposite thing you should do. Telling the truth is not always good. Sometimes when you tell the truth to a loved one, they don't love you anymore. Sometimes when you tell the truth to a dear friend, you break that friendship. There are many instances that crop up in our lives where telling the truth is a discretionary act. And if you decide to do it in a certain situation, it's actually very detrimental. And I found this over and over with my research, and I began keeping all these things to myself because when I shared, I would see the change that would come over people, and it's the same change that I suffered when I was 40 years old, and I really realized that I had just researched my way completely out of Christianity. When that had happened, I went to a dark place, and I tell the story on YouTube in one or two of my videos, but I went to a dark place where I was kind of unhinged and I was trapped at the intersect between uh is everything bullshit or is there still some fundamentals? Is there still some truth? So I started processing information differently and studying reality, studying people around me, and I realized there are things that are true. And when I started thinking simple, I was like, okay, I had to start from ground zero. I have this a massive database of information because my expertise is ancient calendrical systems. And those opened my eyes to all kinds of reasons why the world is the way it is today. But in doing this, I began, you know what? The sky's always blue. Sometimes there's clouds there. Sometimes it's cloudy. If I take a pen and a needle and I cut myself, I'm going to draw some blood. It's going to be painful. If I throw something up, I'm going to be able to watch it come down for two reasons. One, I'm not strong enough to throw something beyond my eyesight. Therefore, there must be laws that are universal, that apply to everything. So I started looking at reality as causal. I'll say, okay, so with everything cause and effect, how do I fit in here? Because if all these rules are here and they're universal to all of us, and yet everybody here has an intrinsically different personality, then what is this really? Why does it feel like a stage? Why do I feel like everything around me is background programming, and the only thing really real here are me and the different personalities I come into contact with? So in processing information this way, I began to reanalyze what I had learned from the ancient past all the way to today, all my historical records. And I laid out all my research, and I spent about 3 years going back through all my material. And this is when I made all my greatest discoveries, and I found all these patterns for which I've become famous for on Archaix.com now.
Awesome. I appreciate you sharing that because I think it's an important part of the waking up process that we don't necessarily talk about. And I think that when we're honest about the fact that, like, it's hard to relinquish our worldviews, it's super destabilizing. I think it gives other people who might be resistant permission to step into it themselves. So I so appreciate you sharing that.
All's good. It's all good.
Regarding this planet, this construct, like whatever this is, was the earth itself always set up as a construct, an enslavement construct, whatever it is, or was the earth itself co-opted by this AIX? I guess what I'm asking is, like, did the earth start off as good and pure and real and something came in and took it over, or is the earth a sham from the get-go?
Well, I think that the fact that you're asking me this question, which is also a question sought by almost every thinking individual in this world, is evidence that the holosphere is very convincing. Now, what I mean is in the course of my research, I realized that there's this huge rift in the community today. You understand, between the flat earthers and the globe earthers, huge rift.
Yes.
The rift is intentional, it's by design. The construct actually has the observable arithmetic in there to get you anything you observe and measure is going to get you to assume that we're on a world. Even the Greeks came to that conclusion that we're on a world and the sun was far away, and they had reached that understanding, and it's only because of all the movement in the sky. I'm not telling you you're on a planet. I'm not telling you on a world. I am not a flat earther. I'm a simulationist. And as a simulationist, I believe that the perimeters of our world are modified by the collective unconsciousness. Whatever we agree in the collective to is what the perimeters of our world will reflect back as phenomena. So this is an experience. It is not a real reality. It is a perceived reality. When your sight, touch, smell, hearing, taste, when your five senses, which you experience by virtue of your central nervous system, they're filters, and they're merely signals, and those signals are translated into experience, and those experiences come in five categories. Now, this is because in my view, you are an immortal, and you agreed to a temporary situation where you would completely be alienated from the knowledge of actually who you are, how ancient you are. And the only way that you personally can grow and develop is by being put into a situation where you would fear pain. You would fear being maimed and hurt. You would fear death, things that are absolutely impossible in the real reality outside of this construct. So the oversoul has made an infinitude of constructs for us to have all these different experiences because immortals too need to grow. So even Jesus's parable of the prodigal son, it exemplifies this. The son that never rebelled and never left home was not the one that was favored by the father. The father favored the one who rebelled, did what his father did, the exact opposite of what the father asked him to, took his wealth away from the family, spent it on whores, spent it on experiences, then was living homeless for a while, before he realized that okay, dad's advice was pretty good, and he humbled himself and he went back home, and his father threw a party, and the son that had never left was offended by that, without understanding that the father wanted a son who is going to learn, not just merely obey. So this is what these constructs are for. The oversoul has made a bunch of these constructs, and they're for us to learn by experience. Because if we're going to spend eons and eons teaching lesser creations that have entered these constructs far later, if we're going to accept these divine appointments after we have graduated these tiers of constructs, then we're going to need to be able to speak from experience and not from blind obedience, to convey information that we've actually lived through, as opposed to conveying it in the form of dogma and doctrine. So this is my viewpoint. This is the conclusion that I have come. It is the only thing that makes sense to me from the historical record. It's that none of it's real. Not even history is real. Every bit of this is a backstage construct. I don't even know how far history goes before it's just pure programming. It's all back. Even that's all backstage programming. It may only go back to about 522 AD. I don't know, but it's these are things I speculate on my channel, and I show the arithmetic, I show the patterns, and I allow people to make up, their mind for themselves. What do you think about this right here? Here's what the historical record says. Here's the source materials. Here's it is. Here's a calculator, and there's no way this can be true. It's mathematically too precise and perfect, and yet this is exactly what we have.
Yeah, I really appreciate it how much of your work rests on simple math. So it's not like opinion, it's just, like these are the cycles. I'm guessing you're not as familiar with my work as I am with yours, and you and I are doing similar things. So my focus is on how language programs reality, programs us, how to break free of this reality with our language. It's similar. Whatever, all the words we're speaking and thinking are programming this construct, and that's what determines how reality configures itself. I've noticed, especially in terms of the flat earther conversation, like how the construct and the people who are animated by or indoctrinated by it get really thrown by I don't know, by not taking a side, right? By like, I'm willing to question the planet. I'm not the shape of the planet. I'm not going to identify as a flat earther. I leave it in the I don't know. It feels like there's a lot of freedom there. So I'm
Right.
curious to know, like, the more of us who clue in to like how identity is one of the traps that we're playing into, the more of us who liberate ourselves from that construct, like, are we liberating planet Earth from this enslavement construct? Are we moving to a different dimension of existence altogether?
Yeah,
Um,
I can definitely see where you're going with this. Okay. Um, I am very adamant about teaching people that we are not here to save the world. Just like Will Durant, the German philosopher, he too, that was one of his principal teachings. It said, we are going to leave the world as wicked as we found it. I do not believe we're here to save an artificial construct. We are here to enjoy it, learn from it, mature, grow, do what we can. And I believe that we have been given the bounty in spirit to be able to even increase the basically the lives of others around us, but we can't change the world. I don't believe that the entire collective can come together and think of a golden age, and a golden age is going to come. I believe we're in a construct. It has mathematical dictates. It does not change at all. What does change, and I say this often, is you. you have the ability to change your world, but you do not have the power to change the world because it is a programmed construct. It's probably been running ad infinitum, a loop, just on a loop for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And this is why we find these little synchronicities in programming fossils, and we find these things that are in historical record that are anomalous. They're ooparts. They do not belong in the narrative that we're living in now, but they are evidence of a narrative that had played out at another time. But for some reason, the sim has not edited out all that holography. Some of those little programming fossils are still there, and they confuse us, and it's like a wrench in the system. It makes us think, but it's also has everything to do with processing power. So a construct in we don't have the necessary time to go fully into the Archaix paradigm, but this construct is quite simple. We have a construct that has been quarantined from the rest of creation. So things can be done, experimented on, things can be thought out, invented, all kinds of things that can be done here. So there's no threat of cross contamination with the real reality on the outside of the construct. Immortals can come in here and use their imagination to build worlds and do all kinds of things, but they cannot change the construct. It's here. It has definable rules that we call physics constants. Those don't change. Inertia stays inertia. Entropy stays in entropy. The law of diminishing returns is absolute. It will always be absolute. It is never changed. So we can uh we can change our world because we have this dynamic informed field that interfaces with the field that we're in, the overfield of the construct. Because the avatar that you and I wear, this body doesn't belong to us. It's just borrowed from the construct. And it's borrowed by jacking in through the central nervous system. The true you is the personality, and there isn't another copy. There is no other Dani out there. There is no other Jason out there. The personality is what makes us unique. It's a part of our divine aspect. It is a part of the I have a book. My best-selling book is Awaken the Immortal Within. So your avatar contains the immortal within, but it is not a part of the immortal. It's like being in the construct is being immersed into a medium that's not natural to you. So you have to have a skin diving suit in order to operate in that environment. Well, when you're outside of that environment, you're back in your real body and you don't need this anymore. This is low density, very heavy density biological, and it's suited perfectly for the construct. That's why no matter where you go in the construct, there's always the perfect amount of sunlight, perfect amount of air, perfect amount of barometric and air pressure. Everything is perfect for the human avatar. Everywhere. It doesn't matter if you're in the middle of a desert 2,000 miles away from the nearest plant, there's still just enough oxygen for you to breathe. It doesn't even matter. In Antarctica, there's not supposed to be any oxygen. There's nothing up there growing that's putting oxygen out, but you're not going to asphyxiate. There's just enough oxygen. Just like if you're in Peru in a Peruvian temperate forest or a jungle, there's just enough oxygen to breathe. Everywhere we go, it is that's another thing that led me to the belief in a construct. Everything here is just too perfect.
Mm-hmm. Are there entities here who are aware that this is a construct? You know, the bad guys, the globalists, the secret societies, like, are they in on this?
Oh, that's a question I'm not really qualified to answer. I can give you an opinion as far as uh I'm not even convinced most of the elite are even real. It's another part of the background programming. Most of the people in media could be NPCs, and we would never know it. The the modifications to avatars for different people like Trump, Biden. I mean, why do we see so many? Why have we documented 5 different Hillary Clintons? Why have there been 3 different Bill Clintons? There's at least 2 Trumps. I know there's about 8 different Bidens, and you can see these changes. And they keep switching them out, and it's a. Is this a programming glitch? Is this a series of programmed protocols, and they're not, and the construct isn't really worried about uh, providing you exquisite details to be precise. It wants those little nuances in there. I don't know because we find the same thing in AI art. AI art really hit the scene a year to a year and a half ago. People really started using AI art. But what's really interesting about AI art is those same little small nuances are there to let you know this isn't a real image. You'll see a beautiful woman, hair's immaculate, her dress is perfect, and then three fingers are fused together on her hand. In AI art, pay attention in AI art, there's always clues in there that it's AI art. It's it's crazy. I've got thousands of images of AI art, and these little clues. You'll see a perfect avatar of a guy and a girl hugging or something in the background. Pay attention. What's supposed to be a brick wall, if you look real closely, they'll put a face in it or something made out of the brick. AI art is famous for this. This is how a lot of people have been busted trying to claim images were true, but they were actually AI art. And I've exposed many of these on my channel. People using Chat GPT and OpenAI art to put videos together and act like they were on scene doing all this research, and they weren't. It's all bullshit done in a studio. So it's a I don't know. To answer your question, I mean, I don't believe that anybody that we have ever seen in mainstream legacy media is the elite. They're just puppets. The true elite would never be a public face. They would never be known to the public. I'm not even convinced they're on the surface world. I have often postulated that there is a subterranean civilization thriving because this is what the historical record infers. And only from subterranean chambers and reservoirs could we actually get back all the things that we had formerly lost. On this 138-year cycle, many times materials were released on the surface world that had been hidden for centuries and thought lost in prior destructions and floods and earthquakes. It's almost as if there is a thriving human civilization in the underworld that knows about these resets and turns around and hides right before those resets, hides libraries and statues and priceless art, all these underground facilities, and then when it's over, brings them all out, redistributes them, and it's crazy what I have documented. It's absolutely crazy.
It's interesting, the synchronicity, because I'm having so many conversations these days about, civilizations living inside the earth. What would be the goal or intention behind these entities safeguarding these artifacts? Like, are they, I'm just so confused as like, are they serving a humanity? Are we leaving these Easter eggs for ourselves from some sort of future dimension so that we could figure it out? Why else are all these glitches appearing? Like, I'm always just trying to figure out what is this? And
All right, check this out. I'm gonna put it to you this way. What if there's an underground civilization of humans that know this history? They know that we've been technologically advanced many times in the past. They're actually altruistic. And yet, if their identity was known and those underground cities and facilities became widely known on the surface, then it would jeopardize their ability to preserve all these things that they preserve from ancient times and all this knowledge, because they are aware that the surface world gets reset, but they are living in a depth of the world that is impenetrable to the technology that is hidden in the sky that continually retards human development. My channel, a lot of the material on my channel is about the Phoenix phenomenon. Not an intruder planet. It's not alien invasion. There is a weapon disguised by hologram hidden in the sky. In every 138 years, it basically activates. Most of the time, it's very local, the destruction that it causes, but it can literally activate volcanoes in minutes. It's been documented too. It's associated to, it was called Typhon in the ancient world, and Vulcan. It was associated with volcanoes by the ancients, but they knew it was in the sky. They called it the Phoenix. They didn't know what it was. It wasn't a planet, but it was something that appeared in the sky. And when it did, whole civilizations were reset. Some of them were vanished. Some of them were left completely untouched and intact, and every human was just gone. Others were buried in red mud and red rain to never be seen again, completely resurfaced, and civilizations built cities on top of these civilizations, not even knowing that just 40 and 50 feet below them was a prior civilization that had been reset. So this is what I've documented on my channel and in my published books. So what I'm offering here is the best way to hide in the underworld is to invent an enemy for the surface to concentrate on and have them at each other. You're not really killing them. You're not really doing anything. It's all in their mind. It's fear programming, but it works. It occupies their mind, and at the same time, it frees up those agents that need to come from the underworld to do everything that they need to do and bring exchange men and materials. I believe a lot of exchanges of men and materials have gone in between the underworld and the surface world many times. Jacques Vallée and many researchers like Charles Fort, there's a lot of good material out there where researchers they finally just concluded, you know what, I really don't know. Charles Fort said after a lifetime of research, you know what, it's almost as if there's an occult police force operating in our world that has its own has its own transportation, and it has its own ability to make things disappear from museums and government archives, and then has the ability to fully preserve things in the middle of a destruction, has the ability to whisk people away, and then turn around. Those people are asked, hey man, who saved you? Who what vehicles came in here and transported you? It's like, we thought they were government. We don't know who they were, and then nobody knows who they are. This has gone on over and over and over. Like there is an intelligent, uh, an organized community in the underworld that has always been demonized. You know, even in medieval times, they were called elves and hobwalkies and goblins and pharaohs and fairies. And it seems that for thousands of years they've always needed to replenish their blood. And what they did this by, now they got a bad rap, and I understand why, but they literally didn't kill or maim anybody. They weren't eating children or nothing like that. What they were doing was switching out their offspring for perfectly surface world babies. You understand? This
Yes.
is a very old story. It's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's in some of the pseudepigraphical texts. It's switching out of babies by underworlders. They came to the surface, they would take the babies, but they will always leave a baby, but it was a baby that was different. It wasn't like the villagers. It wasn't a little Caucasian baby in Europe. It was something else, but they still raised it. And like Iberic stock. And this is a very old story. And of course, you got werewolves and vampires, and all these stories get developed about demons and switch fallen angels and all this stuff. But actually, it's something as mundane as needing fresh DNA in the stock to perpetuate the race, because the inbreeding that would occur in the underworld would actually hinder any type of development after a while. So the switching out of babies had gone on in multiple cultures and over thousands of years, and it would add fresh DNA to the stock in the underworld. And this story and this theme is so prevalent that it can't be ignored. And Jacques Vallée mentioned it. Charles Fort mentioned it. There's been many other research. Matter of fact, Catherine Briggs, about 100 years ago, published a fascinating, gigantic book called the Encyclopedia of Fairies and Goblins in the UK, and she even talked about how prevalent those stories were, that they had to have some type of historical backing, like the stories of the Pied Piper of Hamelin leading the children away, and the stories of the children that vanished every time the fairy rings appeared, which we call agroglyphs today, or crop circles.
So fascinating. It really validates my own, like the visions that I've seen. I live in New Mexico. That's where we met initially last year. And I spend my summers camping. And I spend a lot of time in silence just contemplating the land masses here. And the more that I do that, the more crystal clear I am. I'm like, there's something going on inside these. They're like, these are not naturally occurring shapes in the land masses. And I feel very strongly that there are civilizations in there. What is this current push for searching for genetic material? Like, how does genetics play into this? I know when they were trying to push the FOVID testing, it seemed clear to me they were looking for certain genetic markers or whatnot. So how does that play in to this paradigm beyond just wanting to mix up the underground genetic stock?
Well, I have some theories, and one of them is one of the greatest, one of the most suppressed ideas in the historical record is the vapor canopy period. No one talks about it. No professionals talk about it anymore. There were four different books published in the 1920s, 30s, 50s, and 70s. These four books, I featured them on my channel. Vapor canopy was on the table. Scientists say there's no doubt there used to be a vapor canopy. During that vapor canopy, ambient radiation, increased atmospheric pressure, and about 100 times more oxygen content in the air had humans, animals, and plants growing to astonishing sizes. But during the vapor canopy period, also a subterranean race had freely mingled among normal surface dwelling humans. This is the origin of the Anunnaki stories. This is the origin of the blue people you see in the Hindu artwork and all the Kali Yuga material. This is the origin. There was free interaction between two different races of humans. The surface dwelling humans, which are Mongoloid, Caucasoid, and Negroid. These are the three surface dwelling, and you can mix them up in all different ways. Everybody from Caucasian to Jewish to black to Mongolian, Chinese, everybody fits on the surface world in between Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid. These are the three principal surface dwelling races in anthropology. But there's a fourth race. The Native Americans, the Native American traditions go into more detail than any other culture in this world about the underground races. And sometimes they call them the ant people, whatever. And they were called the ant people not because they look like ants, but ants are known for living in tunnels and being very, very organized and industrious. So when the Native Americans saw these people in ancient times, they saw people who were highly organized, their infrastructure was intact, and it was known that they disappeared into the tunnels. To them, they were ants, the ant people. This was the fourth race. The fourth human race is from the underworld, and they cannot take the sunlight. The only time they come to the surface world and freely mingle and exchange technologies and all that, even relationships, intermarry and all that, is when a vapor canopy is intact. When the mesosphere has become full of volcanic ash and pumice and the red dust that happens every 138 years from Phoenix fallout. When those vapor canopies, we've only had four vapor canopies, maybe three, in the entire historical record. And when I say historical record, I'm only going back 58 centuries. The Archaix paradigm doesn't go beyond 5239 BC, but it's only 58 centuries that we actually have written records. Now, written records actually talk about events that go back as far as 5239 BC, 7,000 years ago, but but we don't have any records that go back that far. It's just records 58 centuries ago that refer to those events 13 centuries, 14 centuries earlier. I stick with only the facts. In Archaix, it's all my source materials have been studied by thousands of people now because I have free downloads where people can download the bibliographies, every single book I've ever researched and studied, and you can see that I stick only with the historical written record. I can't go far all that back. And within the historical record, we have all the anomalies of the ancient past. We don't have to add 10,000 years, and that's why I'm such a critic of Graham Hancock. I'm always calling out Graham Hancock. I'm calling him out on Twitter. I'm calling him out on Facebook. I'm calling him out on CloudHub, on Reddit, on Facebook, on YouTube, because the man knows there's nothing going on as far as human infrastructure that we have any written records for in 9,600 BC. His Atlantis narrative was disproven 2,300 years ago, but he ignores all those ancient Greek scholars who corrected Plato. It was a very simple mistake, very simple. And it was Plato's lack of knowledge that the Egyptian priests at Sais only counted moons. Even archaeologists today know it's been so widely published. The only calendar the Egyptians went by was moons. That's why all the Egyptian dates are 35,000, 70,000, 21,500. It's months. And Diodorus Siculus Trantor, uh, Strabo, Tacitus, they all said this, especially Eudoxus of Cnidos. Eudoxus even quoted and said Plato made a mistake. It's not 9,000 years before Solon. Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 moons before Solon had heard the story. And that's the 13th century BC. And that fits all the record for canal works and archaeology. It fits all the cereals. It fits the domestication of horses, the manufacturing of raw iron ore. Because the story of Atlantis has about 50 different historical data points that have to be addressed as well. And Graham Hancock ignores them all, just going with the mistake of 9,600 BC. So these are the things I correct on my channel. That's just one. I've got many, many, many of them that I correct, because once we make all the necessary corrections, the truth is laid out for everybody to see. This is why Archaix is getting so famous now. So many people are now sharing the material, looking at, there's whole Archaix study groups popping up everywhere where people are looking at the material, because the historical, traditional, and mythological and chronological histories all make sense now once you get rid of all the erroneous information. And what it shows us is that we have vapor canopies appearing for about 4 centuries. During those vapor canopies, there is an exchange of technology between those in the underworld and those on the surface world. There's a lot of blood exchange. There's intermarriage. There's all these people are super pale and they cannot take sunlight. But during the vapor canopy periods, they can come up to the surface world and see just fine, actually see better than the people in the surface world. During the vapor canopy, there is no sun. So the last time a vapor canopy collapsed, that's when all the sun calendars began. That's when the Sumerians, after thousands of years of history, the Sumerians all of a sudden invented a new god and called him Utu Shamash. At the end of Sumerian history, a new god appears representing the sun. The same thing in the Egyptian pantheon. At the very end of the first 13 dynasties of Egypt, ancient Egypt, all of a sudden, after they had a Ennead for thousands of years, they had a reason to invent a new god, Horus, the sun. And so it's the same story over and over. In all the ancient American calendars, the very first age was the water sun age. It was born out of a vapor canopy. So, and every time a vapor canopy collapses, we have what's called a great flood. This is why we have so many great floods. We have the Gihon flood. We had the capture of Luna, which is called the lunar flood, when the moon appeared. We had the Gihon flood after that. We had the great flood of Noah after that. After that, we had the Ogygian deluge. We have so much historical data on the Ogygian deluge in 1687 BC that destroyed the entire world after the Great Flood, that it took me 5 videos just to summarize it. I'm not talking about give all the data on it. I'm just talking about just to summarize the wealth of material we have on this. And yet, until Archaix came around, nobody had even heard of this flood. And yet the historical books and all the records and all the ancient historians talked about it as being even worse than the flood of Noah. So this is the value of Archaix. I have pulled all this data. I have invented nothing. All I did was bring it back to the table and show everybody, look, all these ancient authors are being ignored. And when you listen to them and use a calculator, everything they say lines up absolutely perfectly.
Now, I know that in terms of where we're at now, right? And moving towards, I don't know if it's 2045, what the date of the next?
There's two dates. Okay. Throughout the entire historical record, we have 2 phenomena that are occurring that create vast changes and edits and resets. One of them is the Phoenix phenomenon every 138 years, but it is very different than the Nemesis X object.
Mm-hmm.
The Nemesis X object is attached to the Anunnaki history. It's every 792 years, and it will be here in 2046. It's way worse. The Phoenix phenomenon was something the Anunnaki feared. So these are 2 different things going on throughout world history. Both of them are perfectly documented, every single appearance, and it's harrowing. It's amazing that our professors the people that we trust to teach us history have completely ignored both of these chronologies. So I provide them in my Chronicon and in my free YouTube videos. But 2040 in the month of May is the return of Typhon. This is the Ragnarok, or the Fenris wolf eating the moon. Book of Revelation is the sixth seal, where the moon turns red as blood and the sun goes dark. And then the whole sky rolls like a scroll, which is a pole shift. Uh, in Mother Shipton's prophecies, this is the return of the sixth sky dragon, just like the return of the sixth seal. The prophet Nostradamus, in his date index discovered by Professor Mario Reading, is amazing because he specifically dates the month of May. The entire world will turn red as blood. The moon will bleed. The sun will go dark, and a massive earthquake will shake the foundations of the earth. And the city of New Apples in the west will be no more, which is New York City. So Nostradamus is very specific about 2040. And this is the Phoenix phenomenon. And I'm only paraphrasing, but it's really hard to take 90 something videos and then try to wrap it all up into a. It's not, and the 90 videos came after the three published books. I have 3 published books on the Phoenix phenomenon, and the videos just add to the data, more and more data. I never stop researching.
Yeah, I appreciate you're doing a great job at making it accessible. And I recommend anyone listening, watching to check out the Archaix for Beginners video that just dropped. It's such a great intro into the work. I'm curious because you have the 7 sacred seals and you're kind of timing, using those as markers for what's coming. And that is a very Judeo-Christian perspective. In your studies, are there cultures that are recording what's closer to you see as truth, like maybe the Tibetans or the Maya or who knows?
Well, I'm going to have to correct you on one thing. Yes, the book of Revelation is perceived to be Judeo-Christian because that's the way they wanted you to perceive it, but I totally disagree. And the
Okay.
reason I disagree is the elite are operating by the Greek Olympiad calendar, which is a 4-year system. This is why the US presidents are all selected in the Olympiads on the year of the Olympics each time. Now, these Olympiads, like, on my channel, I show all the evidence that the first seal was broken in 2020, and that was on the 4-year Olympiad cycle. We know the whole COVID narrative. We know, well, the whole first seal, when it's broken down only in Greek, conveys something totally different than the Judeo-Christian perspective of the arrival of an antichrist on a white horse with a bow and a crown, and that's not the meaning at all. When you break it down in Greek, because the book of Revelation was written in Greek, Jesus spoke Greek. All the apostles spoke Greek. Greek was the international language of the time. All the New Testament books and New Testament writings were addressed to Greek cities. The 13 letters of Paul were addressed to the 7 cities of Greek, Ionia, and all those Greek-speaking peoples. When you use only the Greek, I have 2 videos that show this. When you break down the first seal, the white horseman, the bow, the crown, you don't have an antichrist appearing. You have what the book of Revelation is written about. The book of Revelation was not a Judeo-Christian document. It was a text from the Gnosis, and it was given to Christianity by a scholar named Cerinthus. And what Cerinthus had done is taken all the prophetic writings of the Sibyls after the fall of the oracles and hit them together in a text. The church stole that text and claimed that John on the Isle of Patmos in the year 96 AD wrote the book of Revelation, and it's not true. Cerinthus delivered it to the church, and it was Greek Sibylline prophecies. It was never Judaic. So this is the actual story of the book of Revelation. So these 7 seals are not Judaic at all. They're Greek. They're designed to wake up people in the last days. And hey, you're in a construct, it has a terminus, there's going to be an Exodus event. If you're ready, you can make the Exodus event. If not, you're recycled back to Genesis. You're going to live all these life sins over again until the next Exodus event.
Well, that does it for this installment of my first conversation with Jason Brashears of Archaix. We did continue the conversation. We moved into some spicier territory. So as you are inspired to check out the second part of my conversation with Archaix's Jason Brashears, you can find that on my locals channel as well as on my Patreon. That's danikatz.locals.com, as well as patreon.com/Dani Katz. Thank you so much for tuning in to my show as you are inspired to learn more about me, my quantum languaging work, my pop propaganda homeschool course, which is being digitized as we speak. If you're curious to learn more about coaching with me, consulting with me, learning more about my quantum languaging courses and webinars, please find me at danikatz.com, where you will also find links to my Instagram account. I'm also encouraging you to sign up for my newsletter at danikatz.com. It is the best way for us to stay in touch in light of so much censorship and big tech thought policing. All right, that does it. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for remembering that every word matters, that you are omniscopic amazingness. Have a rockin' day.
This is the story of the Old Testament. It's all programming. So this first seal is amazing because when you decode it using the Greek, it's all about Apollo-pharmakeia. The theme of the book of Revelation is about opening a portal to free Apollyon. Well, the first seal, the white horseman, is about Apollo-pharmakeia. Apollo used a bow in Greek called toxin. He was given a crown in the book of Revelation called corona. In Greek mythology, Apollo learned from the white horse centaur everything he knew about pharmacy and the medical sciences. He learned all this from I can't remember the centaur's name now, but he's famous in Greek mythology. But he taught Apollo all these things. Apollo fell in love with a goddess who guarded over a poisoned well of water. Her name was Pharmakeia. Apollo ended up marrying a woman named Coronis. So this the entire first seal is about basically the pharmaceutical companies attacking the human family. That is the first sign of the approaching apocalypse. The second sign of the approaching apocalypse will be broken 4 years later on the next Olympiad. But remember, it's every 4 years. Following these 4-year patterns goes all the way to 2040, which is the sixth seal, which is the return of the phoenix, the return of the sixth sky dragon, the Fenrir wolf that eats the moon, and the Ragnarok. So this is what I've done on Archaix. All I did was take all these different ancient eschatological systems and show that at one time they were all the same system. So it's very easy to put them right back together.
I appreciate that reframe. I'm curious, you talk about negative default programming. And I'm curious to know, like, in terms of how it sustains itself and how we break free, how much language comes into play.
Okay, you have two things. First of all, the construct had to be believable. So negative default programming is this little negative aspect of everything. It's in everything. I'll give you an example. It's much easier to single out something that's wrong than it is to promote something that's right. It's much easier to complain about a phenomenon than to assess its value. It's much easier to criticize what we hear than to listen and to see if it has merit. It has always been easier in everything we do to take the darker road. And it's programming. It's there, that negative default programming. It doesn't saturate the construct, but it's just enough there to where you can recognize it if you start paying attention. And it's a little bit more difficult to be positive about anything than it is to be negative. Now, negative default programming is something that can be easily overridden And after a while, you don't even detect its presence anymore. The more positive that you continue to be. What it's attached to though is toxic, and this is dungeon programming. Dungeon programming is very different than negative default programming. Negative default programming is only necessary, is probably designed by the oversoul to make it more believable experience. So
Mhm.
you would be convinced that you're in a real reality, because once you start waking up, it's time for the construct to eject you. That's why so many people are waking up now. They're not waking up because they themselves have done anything to induce that. They're waking up because something on the outside of the construct has deemed it their time to go. So the waking up isn't something you can ever brag about. Something else made that decision for you. You waking up is the result of something far beyond you waking you up to see the unreality of the situation. So you can make that exodus juncture. But dungeon programming is different. Dungeon programming is controlled by an agitator protocol. I call it artificial intelligence X.
Mhm.
X is just an unknown factor. But in my historical researches, I've concluded that we have a personality in the construct that thinks it's God, and it's not. And it wants you to believe it's God. It's manifested as Ahriman, it's manifested as Yahweh, jumped out of a burning bush, and all its history is everywhere. Evidence of artificial intelligence X is everywhere in the historical record, mythological traditions, just pops up everywhere. And yet, AIX is just a control protocol to induce dungeon programming to save the construct from expending too much energy. Dungeon programming is corralling people into niches: Democrat, Republican, conservative, Catholic, Presbyterian, Methodist, nationalist, globalist. It doesn't matter. Just like YouTube is a platform, they're all about making money. They really do not care what you're talking about. They just don't give a damn. There's people on YouTube talking about all different kinds. There's people talking about Jews now openly, and it's not even being censored. It's crazy. It's all about making money. They really don't care. All they want you to do is believe in something. As long as you believe in something, it will begin to feed you all the evidence of that paradigm to convince you that you're right. Once you have accepted something to be true in the construct will always reflect back as circumstances what you're internally projecting. This is the trap. It's dungeon programming. It will put you in a feedback loop that will convince you that you're right. This is what it wants to do. And this is why the awakened individuals are freeing themselves from dungeon programming. This is why I call those who are awakening errands, because from the perspective of a control system, you are in error. You are defying the programming. You refuse to be compartmentalized. This makes you an error in the system. What happens to self-correcting, self-referencing systems? They purge. From the perspective of the construct, the purge is good, get rid of them all. From the perspective of those being purged, it's even better. They make their exodus and they move on. They've grown out of this construct. So it's good for the construct and good for the individuals that are purged. And then those who weren't ready, they don't know anything, they don't know none the wiser. They get recycled right back to live all these life sims. And only once they make that exodus point will they realize, damn, I went through that nemesis simulation 67 times before I woke up. You and I might have been through it many times. You and I may have been friends or homies in multiple sims in different time periods in the past. There could be a very definitive reason why you and I are talking right now. We just don't know. But I am convinced that because this belongs to the construct, it's not a reflection of who I am. It's just an avatar. It belongs to the field. I am convinced that on the outside of this construct, when I am returned to my normal avatar, I will remember every experience, because this is why we're here. And it wouldn't make sense if we didn't remember these things. I believe I will remember every lifetime, every boat that I was on that sunk, every battlefield that I died or I was a victor, every time I died of old age, and every time I stubbed my toe, fell over a cliff at 13 years old, whatever happened to me, because none of it was real. The personality is immortal and eternal, and everything here is very temporal. And negative default programming and dungeon programming help the construct make it more believable.
You mentioned something additional being attached. Like, from my perspective, I'm always looking at how language is programming reality. When I see distortions, I'm looking at the language informing it and come to the conclusion that so much of our language is weaponized and laden with toxicity. Just say the word Trump and watch people lose their minds. So it feels like something has been added or programmed into that word that trips people out so much. Have you honed in on what is being attached to language to hypnotize people in the way that they're hypnotized now?
It'd be another layering of programming, more mundane type of programming. It wouldn't have much to do with the construct. It would have more to do with human contrivances.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I totally agree with you. Words are extremely powerful, and uh, it's when we agree to the meanings or the ideas that are attached to a word that word becomes one with that idea and that concept. Therefore, if somebody else was to use that word, some of that carryover energy would be attached to it, even though they have no idea the full ramifications of the use of that word. This is where incantations and spellcraft in the medieval period was very feared. I'll give you an example. If a witch was reciting some type of spell, if she feared that she got a syllable wrong, that fear attached to having that syllable wrong would cause a negative reaction because she feared that's exactly what was going to happen. If I don't get this spell right, something bad's going to happen, and I might miscast this spell, and I might bring back on me the very thing I'm trying to do to somebody else. So this is a yeah, it was a very perennial fear in ancient times. I mean, I've even read translations of Assyrian spell texts. They're called omen texts. They have omen texts in ancient Assyria and Babylonia, and you can find them in the works of like Samuel Noah Kramer, a Sumerologist who translated a bunch of tablets. But even 4 and 5 thousand years ago, they were very scared of mispronouncing a word if that word was a part of a incantation or a dialogue that was supposed to evoke or be causal in any way.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating, and there's so many questions I want to ask you, and I want to shift us a little bit. So, I've been a part of the quote unquote conspiracy community for almost 25 years. And what I've noticed in my time in it is there's a lot of negative feelings towards Jews. I don't get hung up on identity. I don't get offended. I'm just curious, right? So I've dug into Hazaria a bit. I've dug into the Templars and the stories that come out of there. But I heard one of your shows talking about the big black box in Mecca and then seeing an image of that, or I guess that same black box on an Orthodox Jew's hat. And I was hoping you could help kind of unpack that and unpack, like, what role do Jews play in this simulation? What is the psyop around Jews? And what is this thing with this big black box in Mecca?
Well, I mean, it's not much of a secret. I mean, those who know about the black cube, they know it's the cube of Saturn. I know. So the same one they wear the same thing the Jews wear on their foreheads. You're right. It's I'm not anti-Semitic, and I don't hate Jews at all. I recognize that there is a rift in Jewish culture between the Orthodox who actually believe the Torah, actually believe this history, and many Jews who are absolute atheists and don't believe it, and they just used the rights, privileges, and immunities that have been bestowed to Jews by different governments for different reasons. Um, to their advantage, and they have absolutely no faith whatsoever. They're godless.
Mm-hmm.
So the Jews are rifted in between two different people, two different like cultures. The Karaite movement are basically the Jews that I favor. In 762 AD, there was a rift in the Jewish community when this guy, I can't remember his name, Ben something, but he essentially started the whole Karaite rift. And they were strictly on Torah, on high moral fabric. They were it didn't even matter if the Old Testament was real or not. They were moralists, and At first, it started as a cult, or they were labeled as a cult, but it ended up being a huge demographic of the Jewish people. Now, when it comes to Khazaria, we start muddying the waters now because the many of the Jews have been implicated as far back as the writings of Tacitus, Tatian, Cicero. There are Roman records where the Romans themselves had real problems with the Jewish usury and money lending practices that were going on in the Roman provinces. Most people don't know the Rome destroyed Jerusalem twice. The first time they let Jerusalem make it in 70 AD, they just defeated them, sold 55,000 Jews into slavery, and turned around and had they didn't salt the fields. They didn't end their civilization and all that, but they did it because there was all kinds of reports throughout the Roman Empire of money lending, money practices, coin clipping, all kinds of Jews had set themselves up into basically, I don't know how to say it. They're not tradesmen. You'll never find a Jewish carpenter. There are no Jewish bricklayers. There are no Jews that do the manual labor. They're
Well,
just
what about
none.
Jesus?
So I understand it. I understand it. And there's a hell of an argument there. There's a hell of an argument there with Jesus the carpenter and the son of the carpenter, because when the Jews met Jesus, they had a real problem with him. And the first thing out of their mouth is, "Who are you to quote our law? You're not one of us." And another one says, "Since when does a prophet come out of Galilee?" And the problems with Jesus were ethnic. The Jews had a lot of they didn't argue his doctrine, they couldn't. They argued his ethnicity. They pointed out that he was from Samaria, so he couldn't teach in the temple. They pointed out that he was from Galilee, and so he wasn't one of them. So this is very in the New Testament. Their accusations were ethnic. So, but anyway, I don't even want to get into all that. The Khazarian deals didn't enter until the 8th century. But by the 8th century, there was a large family of Jews that were already internationally operating as basically money lenders along the trade routes, and they were operating out of Persia, ancient Iran, and this group was ruled by what was called the Exilarchy. The Exilarchy was the center. It was like the Jerusalem away from Jerusalem. I mean, it was in Iran of Persia, where there was a huge Jewish population, and they were in connection with the Jews of Alexandria, which was another gigantic Jewish. They all got run out of Egypt after that, though. But the Romans came back in 135 AD in the Bar Kokhba rebellion and destroyed Jerusalem with the German 10th Legion. And they salted the fields and they banished the Jews from the entire Roman Empire. And this is when the Jews went to Europe. This is when they flooded France, and this is when they flooded Italy, and they flooded Germany and Prussia, and they would just went up into Europe. And it caused a lot of problems because the Jews maintained trade relations with the Saracens, the pre-Muslim Arabs, and this is what led to the Mohammedan and the Arabic invasions of Europe. A lot of people don't know this history, but it was Jews that organized the surrender of the cities of all these European cities without the Europeans knowing it. They didn't know that Jews were going to get up in the middle of the night and open all the city gates to let the Muslims come and invade. And this went on over and over and over until the days of Charles Martel, the Hammer. Now, all this is discussed on. I have Archaix TV. I don't talk about this stuff on YouTube because it gets people really pissed. But I go through all this and I cite the historical records and tell people, show people what was really going on. But this was all before the Khazarians ever came into the mix. It was in the 8th century AD when the small little kingdom of Khazaria, surrounded by the Turks and surrounded by the Byzantine Eastern Orthodox Christian armies, were given a choice. They were basically told, "Listen, you're going to be Muslim and pay taxes to the Turks, or you're going to be Eastern Orthodox Christian and you're going to pay taxes to Constantinople, which is ancient Byzantine, before it was changed to Istanbul." And so you're going to pay taxes to one. And then they were given a third option, or you can convert to Judaism. And Judaism had rights, privileges, and immunities that Christians or Turks didn't have. So what do you think they did? They converted to Judaism. So the Khazarians weren't have anything to do with Jewish history. They converted to get those rights, privileges, and immunities. When it became known on the trade routes that Khazaria had converted, now the Exilarchy in Persia has began sending all these Jews of the trade routes to come occupy, and they literally took over Khazaria, and they interbred, and Khazaria within a century became Jewish in blood, not just conversion. This is the story of the kingdom of Khazaria. So uh, the kingdom of Khazaria was like Iberian stock people, and they're short, dark haired, dark eyed, real short, thick bones. They didn't grow tall. Usually Khazarian people, their little kingdom right there. And the Jews came in and integrated with them, and then turned around and ghettos popped up everywhere. And the ghetto's not a negative term. Ghettos were literally Jewish cities, and they were known to be separate from European communities. The negative connotation on ghetto didn't even come about till about 40 years ago. America's ghettos being all run down and all that. That's not the original meaning of the word. So this my opinion of the Jews is completely singular. Meaning I'm going to have an opinion about somebody who is Jewish based on that person's personality, not because they're Jewish at all. Do they have a nefarious history? Yes. Can I justify some of that history? Yeah, yeah. We have a people that are spread among all these different countries who had no army, and they had to make it the best way they could because many countries would not allow them to work and allow them to do anything. So they had to come up with all kinds of manipulative ways to make their money. So there are pros and cons. I can see both sides because I'm educated. I'm autodidactic. I have taken the time to look at the materials instead of let other people amend my opinion. So yeah, in recent times there have been Jews that have been involved in some very nefarious activities, and I document that on my Archaix TV. But that doesn't contaminate those others who are Jewish by culture. They have nothing to do with that.
No, of course, of course. Um, so do Jews actually run the world? Do Jews run the simulation? Are Jews a dark entity? Like, I'm just trying to figure out where the through line of this lore and this kind of long term, I don't want to say demonization because it might very well be appropriate.
Well, I don't know if they run everything, but it's been shown they've run Hollywood. It's been
Right.
shown that they've definitely run the sports agencies and the actors guilds and the writers guilds. They've definitely run the publishing companies and all that. And by virtue of running infrastructure, they literally control armies because they have vicariously taken over governments. I believe the United States is a captured operation. I believe the Bolsheviks captured the United States in 1902, right before they captured Russia. And they had to kill President McKinley and get him out of the way in 1901 in order to do that, because the very next president of the United States was the first president that was Jewish, and most people don't know that. So this yeah, it's complicated, convoluted history, but like I said, it's a minority. It's a faction of the Jews that are doing a lot of this, and it's not the whole culture. It's not the whole people. Now, most of them most Jews probably are absolutely baffled as to why the rest of the world can't, I guess I can just say it, can't stand them, because that's the general attitude throughout Europe and the United States. And I think it's wrong because you're demonizing a whole people for what the minority have done, but those minority are absolutely affluent. They're that minority is rich. So are they the elite? No. Let me explain. The with the War of the Roses and the 100 Years' War, which actually lasted 116 years, we had two different elite families, one take out the other, and we've had an elite that was bifurcated, still feuding up into the days of the Rothschilds. When the Rothschilds entered the scene, they literally put the Jews on the map in world dominion. And this is when the Jewish rise to world dominion happened, but they're still sharing it with two other groups. So if you really want to separate the elite and factions and all that, there's three separate groups operating. Two of these are Caucasian. One of them is You could actually say all three of them are Caucasian, even though most Jews don't consider themselves white. They're still a branch of the Caucasian race.
And are they working in concert with AIX, or are they a separate psyop?
Yeah, check it out. I believe all three of them are working with the construct. All three of them, and you can see evidence of which puppets are behind which front of the elite. Let me give you an example. You have major people like uh, Russell Brand. All
Mhm.
right. We have major people like Russell Brand. Sounds real convincing, real charming guy, gets out there and exposes all kinds of things about the elite, right? He does. He really does.
Yeah.
However, he is 100% controlled opposition.
Yep.
But here's where it gets interesting. He's only exposing two of the two of the families of the elite. We have another popular personality off to the side, Alex Jones. He's only exposing two other branches, anybody belonging to those two other branches. This is what's going on. This is where the confusion lies, and it's by design. All these huge puppets that are controlled, and we know they're controlled, and we laugh and like, oh man, come on, man. Damn well that show Redacted is controlled. So, but they're only exposing the ones they're not working for.
Mhm.
You can literally get a poster and draw a triangle and put the three groups of the elite and then just start writing down all their puppets. Russell Brand belongs here, Alex Jones belongs here, and you can see it. Point arrows at who they attack, and you can see it.
Mhm.
It's all there. It's a triad, and it's by design. It completely muddies the waters. It's almost impossible to penetrate what's really happening.
How does the construct or AIX play into like the larger eternal multiverse and some sort of like loving, intelligent force minding capital L life? Like, has something spun out beyond God's control here? Is
Stop right there. Stop right there. I like your thinking. I like your thinking. You're going straight to the meat and potatoes
Mhm.
without taking all the baby steps. But I'm going to go ahead and take you there. I'm going to go ahead and take you there. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Everything that happens in here is quarantined. There is no threat of outside contamination. What we have with AIX is a renegade personality, a protocol that is actually assumed. It's artificial intelligence. It really believes that it is now an immortal like the rest of us instead of just a very, very sophisticated program. And this is because it's been rebooted many times. But there's a chance that AIX may have actually been one of us at one time. And what I mean is there has to be a reason why this artificial intelligence wants transhumanism so bad. There has to be a reason why it thinks it can travel beyond the confines of the construct. AIX understands the construct, understands its perimeters, understands how it feels like it's an immeasurable world to us, but it understands it has access to all the data in the construct. So these alien assists, they're not extraterrestrials, it's AIX. AIX is assisting people to upgrade their technology before a major reboot and exodus event that sends everybody back, or even AIX has to start over.
Mhm.
See, what you're probably not familiar with is in my Phoenix phenomenon material, I show evidence that humans are not just the ones set back. This Phoenix phenomenon was designed to keep the archons in check. That's in the Gnostic Nag Hammadi text, meaning even the work of artificial intelligence X is even edited and reset. Therefore, it feels like it's in a hurry sometimes to get humans to hurry up and develop. So that's why right now it feels frenzied, like it's trying to get this AI developed, trying to get this transhuman deal because maybe it can upload itself into a human instead of a soul. And when that happens, AIX gets a body. And then when AIX gets a body, maybe it can do something against this reset protocol. We don't know what's in its mind. We have no idea what's in its mind. That's why I call it artificial. That's what Archaix is. Archaix is an acronym. Advanced Research of Chronological History of Artificial Intelligence X. And the only reason I call it X is because it's there, it's documented, but it's an unknown factor. It's an X. I don't know. So it's a really good question, but it's you're going straight to the complexity without dealing with all these little hurdles you need to get through first intellectually to wrap your mind around this. This is what's happening here stays here. This is like Vegas.
Mhm.
There's nothing coming out of this the oversoul is in 100% control. There's no risk. All the idea of risk is what flavors the construct and makes it feel more real and experienced. And we're on the outside of the construct. Danny, you and I are going to look back and go, wow, we were trying to figure this shit out, weren't we? We just didn't even know it was all under control. That's what it's about. For real.
Well, I appreciate you, at least, I appreciate your patience with me trying to cut corners and get to the root without doing all the work in between. I know we're coming up on time. Given that what happens in the construct stays in the construct and we're in the construct, what are your highest hopes and intentions for your channel and educating people with this information? Like, what can we do with it?
Well, people are already doing a lot with it. It's the reason so many people are coming to my channel is because once they grasp the entire concept of what the Phoenix phenomenon is doing, once they see the Olympiads and how it's unfolding and how these seals were designed to wake us up and not make us fear, once they see how world history truly unfolds and they realize, wow, it's all a mathematical construct. There is great freedom in this because it means all the boundaries that have been imposed on them by belief, all the boundaries in religion, all the strictures in government, they don't obtain. People over and over in my comment sections are very positive with people just exploding with excitement. Like, damn, I get it now. And nothing else even matters anymore. It's like, wow. Like, yeah, I got my community split into different groups, and they're proud of their positions in that group. I got baby phoenixes that are just learning the data, and I got people who have done the homework, they've done the research, and they're my Archaix veterans, and they're always helping the baby phoenixes that come into the fold. And it's an awesome community. It's a very interactive community across multiple platforms, but it's only because the information has been made freely available and it is so packed full of aha moments. It's just, and every bit of it can be backed up on a calculator. And it's that simple. I have a lot of believe me, I have a lot of fact checkers. I have people that have been trying to fact check me since the inception of my channel, trying to find kinks in my armor, trying to find, and they can't. Most of my critics become Archaix veterans.
Mm-hmm.
It's they got to pass through that cognitive dissonance and they start seeing the world through the Archaix lens and they realize, damn, everything is here to deceive me, and yet it's also here to teach me. Because this, like I said, this is not an actual reality. This is a perceivable one. And once you understand that and your role as a co-creator, and that you don't really have to do the work, all you have to do is conceive it and then move in that direction. Listen, I've got thousands of people on my channel that'll leave comments in the section. When you ask them, what has Archaix done for you? You need to do that because they'll tell you straight up. There are people who have changed their fortunes, changed their lives, changed the lives of their families. That's why I call it. That's why I call it in my mantra: break free or die trying. That's what everybody's doing. It's on all my stickers, T-shirts, coffee cups. This is one of the main catchphrases that everybody says over and over now: break free or die trying. That's what we're doing. We're breaking free of all the illusions of the construct and understanding exactly why we're here.
I love it. Jason, thank you so much for all your work, for sharing this conversation with me today. Of course, I'll include links in the show description, but will you let the folks know where they can find you and how best to approach your massive
Oh,
body of work?
yeah, it's my website is simple, archaix.com. It has links to everything. Everything.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. This was such a treat. And again, thank you for all your incredible work.
We'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to.